Hey, guess what? The .NET Developer Days Conference is happening October 18th and 19th in Warsaw, with some great speakers and over 30 technical sessions spread over 2 days. Among them are keynotes by Scott Hunter and James Montemagno. If you can't make it to Warsaw in person, they also offer a great online option. For only €150, you can access 2 days of live-streamed conference sessions, as well as all the session recordings after the show. Check them out at developerdays.pl and take 20% off your online registration with the code ROCKS. That's ROCKS exclamation point. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're in, I would say, the fishbowl, but this is more like an aquarium, I think, or a terrarium, maybe.
It is a fishbowl, but it's just in a weird place.
It's a square fishbowl. What do you call that? I call that a terrarium. So we're like,
Yeah, all right.
Are you the frog or am I the frog?
If you're going to get technical now.
I don't know. I could be a snail.
It could be.
Yeah. So we are at NDC Oslo, as we have been for many years.
Many times. Yeah, many times.
And we're here with Michelle Mannering, but we're going to talk to her in just a minute. But first, let's roll the crazy music for Better Know Framework.
Awesome.
All
right, man. What do you got?
Well, last week, I talked about the .NET show and how I'm doing some MSAL authentication stuff. We have done 2 more shows since then, adding Twitter and Google. But the real thing is coming, and it probably will be here by the time you hear this. We're going to do something that doesn't exist anywhere on the internet, which is MSAL authentication in Maui using Maui Blazor. Blazor. So Blazor.
Is that such a thing?
Yeah, it is. You can write Maui applications with Blazor instead of XAML.
Okay.
But the whole mechanics of how you deal with MSAL authentication is different. And there was no help on the internet.
No, I bet. You're just a little too leading edge there,
A little too early to the party, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's good. So go to the .netshow.com and check out all the goodness that we have over there.
Awesome.
So that's what I got, Richard. Who's talking to us today?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1811, the one we did with Catherine Nance when we were at Codepalooza.
Right.
All these in-person shows, very luxurious. We're talking about design, and Wojtek said, hey, great new website.
Yeah.
Regarding the absolute position design, because, of course, we made fun of how hard it is to do that.
Yes, we did.
Recently, I found that using breakpoint is a great compromise between pixel-perfect absolute position design and responsiveness. It reduces the number of edge cases. Problems only occur on an ultra-small and ultra-large screens and around the breakpoints. Second problem is that some of the unused space on some screens, especially ultra-wide ones. But hey, that's why people have ultra-wide screens in the first place.
That's right. Yeah.
Of course I want extra screen space. Yeah, glad you like the website. It is very spare, but I think it's also because there's still things to come on it.
Yeah.
And it does look good on a phone.
It looks great.
It looks great on a phone.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for that. And a copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the social medias. We publish every show to Facebook. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. No absolute positioning. You don't need it.
Yeah.
It's all relative.
We like only responsive tweets.
Only responsive tweets, exactly. That brings us to our guest, Michelle Mannering. She's a developer advocate for GitHub, recipient of the Pause Super Connector Award in 2020 and 2021. Dell Young Entrepreneur of the Year in 2019. Dell Social Media Influencer of the Year 2019. Telstra Business Woman of the Year finalist 2019. Finalist Esports Personality of the Year in 2018, and many, many more. We are in the presence of greatness, my friend.
Well, an esports person, which is its own kind of crazy.
It is a little crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
Although I had the good fortune to meet her at NBC Melbourne.
Yeah. How was that?
In the year. It was a great show.
Cool.
Melbourne's a lovely city, although I feel like a little still pandemic traumatized.
Yeah.
Like people were a little careful.
Well, Australia.
And they did. Well, Melbourne did lots of lockdowns.
Yeah.
So. They were just recovering back in June.
My friend Richard Morris barely got back into Australia from a conference in Denver right as the pandemic was starting.
Yeah, they locked down real hard.
So anyway, welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. You make me sound so good reading out my bio. Just like, wow, so many awards.
I didn't write your bio. That's reality.
What's your game?
In terms of esports game?
Yeah.
I'm a variety streamer, so
Right.
I have a bunch of different games. I have competed, not at a super high level, but I have competed in Smash Bros. And Overwatch, Asphalt 9, which is a super random one.
That's weird. Yeah.
I know, really random, a couple others, but I play League of Legends, a lot of Elder Scrolls Online.
Right.
I've played a little bit of Dota. But basically,
that's its own
whatever's
kind of
going.
crazy too. You know?
Dota is a very interesting community. You either
Yeah.
play Dota and love Dota and
nothing
you
else.
don't like anything else.
Yeah.
But there's not very many variety people who play
Yeah.
Dota. It's like, this is your game.
Yeah, it's your
So
game.
I'm a bit of a weird character when I go into the Dota community because it's like everyone knows everyone there as well. It's kind of
It's
interesting, but they're lovely people.
So when do you get time to be a developer advocate?
Yeah, I know. So actually, I was literally walking down the hallway after the keynote, and the keynote was all about burnout and managing your mental state and not doing too many things, and he was mentioning a point about going to the gym and buying all the fancy clothes and then you've got to get the grams. And I was like, but see, that's a thing for what I do. Because I actually compete at quite a high level of sport. And if you don't put a photo of yourself doing your daily workout routine, it didn't happen.
Yeah, right.
And that's also part of it to like encourage and motivate everyone else in the team as well. And then Amy, who I was chatting to, was like, when do you get time to do normal stuff? Like, it's a good question.
Well, especially as a developer, I find that gaming, if I dive into a game, I'm gone. That's time I can't charge for. So I kind of resist the games.
So I'm a Twitch streamer, so it's kind of like my outlet is to play games.
It's actually how you decompress.
But exactly, it's how I decompress, it's how I connect with the community, but it's also how I then, I use that as a medium to discuss other things. For example, we'll be running around in Fortnite and someone will pop up, be like, redeemed AMA, what is DevOps and should everyone be a DevOps engineer? I'm like, well, let me tell you all about it. And we'll just be running around in Fortnite.
Yeah. Well, I'm building this fortress perimeter to keep you guys back with my grenade launcher.
Totally.
Let me run down the key aspects of DevOps.
And it was really funny because one of the guys I play with is also quite a senior developer, and he's like, so should everyone be a DevOps engineer or should DevOps be an ingrained part of every And I was like, well, so we just end up having these really in-depth conversations about whatever while I'm playing video games. I think I remember once playing Elder Scrolls and someone jumped in and was like, oh, it's nearly the end of financial year. Can you talk to us about personal taxes? And I was like, sure. So we just use it as a way to connect with the community, an outlet, but then as a way to hey, if you want to keep following me and finding out what's happening, I'm going to be at NDC Oslo next week. So jump on Twitter, follow the live tweet.
It's very much the pub.
Totally.
It's just the pub. We all go to the pub. Instead of saying Norm, they say Michelle.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a little more digital, but other than that, and more explosions. There's not enough explosions at pubs.
Yeah, this is true.
So I think this is the first show we've done completely on Copilot.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We've talked around Copilot here and there, but with it finally GAing and being charged for it and so forth, I thought it was time.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, let's really drill into this thing.
Yeah.
Should we be afraid?
It's the end of all our jobs, Michelle.
We were talking about this at breakfast this morning. I have many conversations about, is Copilot going to take my job? And I did a talk recently at an Azure meetup group, and it wasn't even on Copilot. And I was like, well, I'll open up to questions now, whether it's a question about my talk or anything else. And one of the first questions was, you've just relaunched Copilot. Is it going to take my job? And I was like, well, I don't think it's going to replace jobs specifically. It'll replace parts of what you do. So if you look at how automation has changed everything we do, there's a lot of things we now no longer have to worry about so much because we can get part of, an automation platform to do some of that. For example, GitHub Actions now allows you to automate your builds, go through your code, make sure there's no security vulnerabilities, make sure your dependencies are up to date.
But that's not fun work, though.
But exactly, that was a manual job that was boring, time consuming, and you'd often get it wrong.
Right.
So I think, same with Copilot, it allows us to not replace our jobs, but do the more meaningless, or not meaningless, but
I don't have to write another
tasks.
sentiment analysis script, right?
Basically, so it allows you to focus on what you do best and allows you to enjoy the work. And I think that is one of the key things that has come out since Copilot launched, is that the developer, not just the productivity has gone up dramatically, but the developer happiness has gone up. And I think that is a key. Like, not only are people being able to complete their tasks quicker, they're more happy doing it because they get to spend their time and mental energy focus on, okay, what's a better way to solve this problem, or what's a better way to build this thing? And then Copilot is helping me along with the actual process so that I can focus on what I do best. And I think that is cool.
I have two observations. One is, as a Visual Studio 2022 user, even without Copilot, they've done some AI stuff in there to, suggest, if you just press tab, the suggestions are there. But it's great when that's exactly what you meant to do. But when it's not what you meant to do, it can feel cumbersome, can it? Like
a little bit.
But you don't have to press tab, I guess, so it's not invasive. But yeah, it's just like the whole idea that this stuff is there to make suggestions, and it must be a real challenge to make it not get in the way.
So I think there's two key points to remember there. One, this isn't the first AI pair programming extension to VS Code.
Right.
It is definitely the most sophisticated, though, from what I've seen. Second is it doesn't necessarily it makes suggestions, but it's not just a search engine that's finding some similar code and spitting that out, or trying to, think about what you might be writing and saying, oh, hang on, I know what you're going to write. Don't write it. I'm going to auto-complete it for you. I think that's where, and as soon as you start using it, you understand that autocomplete is not what Copilot is. It is not just an autocomplete, and it is not just a search engine that is spitting out code for you and suggesting similar code. It's actually synthesizing code for you that is specific for you. So, for example, if all three of us opened up a new file, same name, same language, and started writing stuff, we'd all get different suggestions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which I think is the cool part about Copilot. Now, that's got its own benefits, I suppose, around ensuring that the code is unique to you, ensuring that if you are writing proprietary software and
it's doing that by looking at your repos, isn't it?
Yeah, so it does it by a few different things. It takes a lot of context that you're writing. So if you've got half a file already written, or half piece, it's looking at the context of how you've already written stuff. It's looking at the way that you write stuff and a few other different things that you've got in there as well. For example, if you come to my talk later, I have a really good example about this, and it's using the comments to help Copilot write and provide better synthesized code for me. So when I wrote, the code that I use as an example is I had a coding challenge to reverse a sentence. Now that's relatively simple. If I write Copilot reverse a sentence, it's going to give me a one line. I was like, hey, well, that's not exactly what we want. We want to make sure that the sentence is reversed, the punctuation is put towards the end, that the uppercase and lowercase is still at the start of the sentence. So instead of just saying reverse a sentence, I broke down the problem into how I would want to do each part of the coding challenge. So I was like, well, first of all, we should turn the sentence into a string so that we can actually pull things out. So I wrote that in as a comment. Mm-hmm. First of all, let's put this in, and it's like, here's a Copilot suggestion. I'm like, cool. Now that we've done that, comment, I want to now, lowercase the first letter of the sentence if it's not an I. And I had like a bunch of sentences. So I was like, cool, let's do it. And then Copilot's like, here. And then I went through all that. And then finally it was like, okay, now put it all together. And then Copilot's like, here. And that's a much better way of stepping through. And that's where that developer
it is clearly a role for you. You're still doing the thinking.
Exactly. And I think that's where people go, well, hang on, actually, no, my job isn't going to be taken away by this. It's only going to be enhanced because, again, I do what I'm good at, which is problem solving.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm really good at breaking down a problem and thinking, technically speaking, how would I actually solve this? I'm not very good as a developer, right? I'm not a developer by background.
Well, then you're not wrestling with syntax.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
API calls.
Exactly.
All right, here's a question, and I'll give you the same question, Richard, both of you. If you were hiring a new developer and you were trying to assess their capabilities and you wanted them to do like some live coding and you give them a task and say, do this, would you let them use Copilot?
Usually we don't, because we actually want to see how developers break down problems and also their underlying knowledge. And then what you would look at is, okay, well, if they're able to do this, what would they be able to do with Copilot? So I'm not
But
sure.
I'm still more interested in your ability
question.
to break the problem down,
Yeah,
not
exactly.
writing code.
Exactly.
Plus, I know a ton of developers that as soon as you're watching them write code, they write way worse code.
Which is why we don't do a lot of live coding interviews.
Yeah,
at
I just don't think it's a good
GitHub. I
idea.
think
I'm not so sure the answer is don't let them use it.
it's more like
what
let
if
them
you-
use it secondarily.
Yeah, but what if you come up as a new developer and you go through uni and all that stuff, and then you become a developer? You're using Copilot for your job. So, is it more important than to figure out what they type in the comments to generate the code?
Well, again, I'm not on the engineering team at GitHub, so I'm not sure.
It's a philosophical
I'm not sure
dilemma.
exactly
Yeah, sure.
whether they're actually deciding to, hire developers on their Copilot knowledge. But we don't do live coded interviews
Right.
at GitHub. That's just one
But
thing we don't
the
do.
corollary to this is we let them use a search engine. And,
Well,
or
that's the
Stack
thing. People are
Overflow,
still using
right?
Stack Overflow because, one of the things is when as a developer, you have your code editor open and you have Stack Overflow.
Sure.
open.
Sure.
And that's a normal thing. And that is one of the reasons why we don't do live coded interviews at GitHub. It's like there is no time as a developer that we are going to expect you to write code in a black box without the
Right.
help of,
No.
Stack Overflow, because that
Right,
is
it's
unrealistic.
unrealistic.
Developers
I
spend 50% of their time searching on Stack
And
Overflow.
arguably they should spend more. Like it's more
probably
important
more.
to search for solved problems than
Yeah.
it is to go out and solve them
and
yourself.
then be able to take those problems and the solutions
implement
and
them
then
well.
implement that properly into your own
Absolutely.
solution. So that's why we
I
don't
can
do
anticipate a day where somebody would
Well,
go to a job interview and use Copilot.
Well, and arguably you'd
Probably.
learn more about them because can they describe the problem well enough that
Right.
this tool can assist?
Right?
Yeah.
And can they know if the tool does
Did a good job.
Did a good,
that. I think that is the key when it comes to more senior developers. For example, again, I'm not a developer by background. So often when I get the Copilot suggestion, I'm like, I actually don't know if that's right or not.
Is this a good solution?
I'm kind of assuming it is, but that's why I then, especially when I'm doing it live on stream, like, all right, my senior developers who are in the chat with me, because I
Yeah.
do live coding as well on Twitch, like, is this actually right? And to that point was when I was trying to solve that original problem before, a senior developer had sent me the solution on Discord, and when I wrote it with Copilot, it was exactly the same, apart from like some of the function names.
Nice.
But everything was right. And I think that's what it comes down to, is going, okay, is this, not only is the solution right, but is it the best way to actually solve it? But
I mean, that's the same dilemma you have when you search on a search engine or when you're looking at Stack Overflow.
true.
I mean, one thing I'd say in favor of Stack Overflow is the commentary and the ranking of the answers. It gives
Helps.
you more confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. But I think that's what is really good because, for example, a lot of senior developers, you cannot physically know everything
No,
as a senior
it's
developer.
only getting harder.
It's getting hard because there's so much out there. So as a senior developer, I was like, I'm very good at what I do, but I need to use the Sessionize API. I have no idea. Hang on, let's turn on Copilot. Function get _ Sessionize speakers, open bracket, bang, here's the
Black.
function.
Yeah.
And it's like, cool, that's how I use a Sessionize API with this file. So I think those kind of things, like,
That's huge.
I mean,
But it's
again,
also-
it saves
the
the
other
time.
one that gets me to go wild is, and I need it in Go.
Yeah, so I think that's the translation when that gets better, because right now it's not fantastic. It's still relatively new.
Right.
But being able to copy and paste copy your a block of code you've written. Say you've written a piece of code in Python and say, can you translate this to Go?
Yeah.
I
That's a
think
step.
that-
That's a much bigger step.
Yeah,
as
well,
opposed
that's
to,
already there
Yeah.
in Copilot, but it's not fantastic yet. It's
Yeah.
still like getting there. But the more people are going to use it, the better it's going to be.
But being able to answer that question, hey, how do I extract this data from Sessionize
Yeah.
in C#, in JavaScript, in Go? It's all calling the API, but you still need the decorators to make it behave.
I just am so blown away by like what Copilot is understanding and knowing. So chatting to a couple of people, again, everyone's fascinated with Copilot. So it's a big hot topic. It's not hard to find someone who hasn't tried it. And she had Copilot turned on. And she was using, she was building some website functionality. But she's like, oh, let's put in my my username, who I'm gonna pretend. So I'm gonna use Diana Prince, you know. So let's put name Diana Prince, email Diana.pprince@amazonian.com, location, and Copilot filled out the Mascaria for her. It had understood what she was doing.
It was now is now pulling from the DC Universe database.
Well, honestly, because we've also got an explain this function, which is featuring Copilot, which is highlight a block of code, tell me what's actually happening. So it'll explain it to you in plain English. So, for example, you are trying to reverse a sentence for what, you know. Then it'll explain it to you in like slightly longer version. Oh, you're trying to reverse a sentence to do blah, 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 blah. And then it'll explain it to you in, in terms of the syntax. It is iterating over each word within the sentence. If it finds this, do this. If it doesn't, and then it will explain it. You can choose to explain it with an example. And if you keep clicking the button, it'll keep explaining it in different ways. So when I was asking for an example, it kept showing me all these movie references as example. I was like, I wonder what they've trained the code on, because I was getting always like,
were they movies you liked?
Yeah, a couple of them were. A couple of them I didn't realize, and then my boss was like, "That's a famous line out of a movie. That is gold. Like, you should screenshot.
You need to know that."
But it's like
it also speaks to, you didn't just train the Copilot's not just trained on GitHub data.
No, it's trained on all publicly available code on the internet.
So does that mean he's trained against Stack Overflow? Because it was feeling to me like this is, if I would be, like, we're not losing our jobs as developers, but Stack Overflow, like, this is a better recommendation engine. The only thing I think I thought of in sense of Stack Overflow is that ranking, qualifying, and discussion part.
Well, those things are still going to happen. I don't think Stack Overflow is any
I don't
chance
think it's
of
going
down.
anywhere. It could be things like, for example, people might start putting their Copilot suggestions on Stack Overflow.
Oh, sure. I think a great way to rack your Stack Overflow scores is you just answer every question quickly with Copilot samples.
Copilot is there to find suggestions on Stack Overflow that have already been solved, right? If Copilot can't figure it out, maybe there isn't enough information in the public domain, right, to get it. So that's when you would go to Stack Overflow and ask.
Except that Copilot was trained on the Stack Overflow data, likely. So
that's what I'm saying. But if it doesn't exist, if the technology is so, like, for example, I was talking about Maui Blazor, right?
Sure.
The MSAL auth in Maui Blazor, I really can't find anything on the internet that works. So I would go to Stack Overflow, and Copilot therefore probably doesn't have a solution either. So I would go to Stack Overflow, and I would be adding to the canon of knowledge that it would then be trained
It makes sense
upon.
to ask that question.
Yes.
Because it couldn't find it.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is your order of execution, try Copilot first. If Copilot can't figure it out, go to Stack Overflow.
Right.
Whereas the first thing I'd usually do is
hit a search engine.
Well, I also think people likely, for example, again, when I'm using Copilot, I don't always know if the answer's right because I'm not a senior developer. But if I started putting my suggestions saying like, hey, this is what Copilot gave me, is this right? And actually getting the community to help you with that, like, that's also another avenue, I guess, for Stack Overflow. Yeah. I don't think Stack Overflow is going anywhere. The community is too big and too it's really valuable for developers. So I don't think it's going anywhere. I think people will start probably using it a little bit less for more common things.
Which is all the better.
Which is, again, because a whole pretense of developers is making developers' lives easier and more fulfilling.
Well, I do think that one of the problems that Stack Overflow has is that a lot of questions are asked over and over again because they're not searching well.
The amount of times I go to Stack Overflow and look for something, I'm like, there are 50 threads on this same thing. Like, that is probably where it needs to be.
And it has turned a certain class of senior Stack Overflow person pretty bitter, which is really the reputation they've gotten, is like, you're going to get crucified for trying to ask anything on Stack Overflow. But it's because it is done pretty inefficiently. So this is a tool that would decrease that
I know Jeff
inefficiency.
Atwood's software based on Stack Overflow, Discourse, is a forum, right? And that has a really good, hey, this is a very similar question to this list of questions. Like they do that right there. They won't jump on you after you ask the question, but the software is smart enough to figure out, that's been asked before.
Yeah, in the end, it's all about good search. I mean, it's very easy to call all of these things super smart search, but I think there's a little bit more to it than that.
Yeah, again, it puts the onus, like, for example, Stack Overflow, all the information's there. Most of the information is there. It's how you look for it.
Yeah.
And again, coming back to that idea of like developers, it's like, can you use your knowledge and understanding to actually find the right answers? So I think that's going to be a big thing.
Yeah, it's
the same with Copilot. It's like, are you using the right context to provide to Copilot? And again, I talk about this a lot in my talk is today, which is all about context. So if you have a look at some of these new AI, say for example, the AI image generator stuff now.
Oh yeah.
You can get absolute junk out of those image generators, or you can get amazing artwork, and it all depends on the search parameters and the context that you provided. So now people on Etsy are selling search or whatever it is, like search parameters and search phrases. That is what's being sold on Etsy,
really crazy.
Which I think is absolutely crazy. But when you look at it, you go, oh, so it isn't just anyone is able to do this. You have to have, imagination, knowledge.
Sure. Well, this is what am I as a developer? Then?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And I think
if you're not getting good results from Copilot, don't blame Copilot. Are you framing the problem space well?
Right.
Exactly. Like some people could have easily complained about my thing, and I was like, well, hang on, this isn't what I want. Let's try and provide it with more context.
But you see the same problem in a search engine. You don't find results because you asked the wrong question.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't get any results at a Stack Overflow. You asked the wrong question. Like and then part of us doing our jobs well as developers is thinking through the problem well enough to render it. I mean, how many times have I not asked a question on Stack Overflow? Because by the time I wrote a good enough question, I'd answered my question.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Forcing yourself to think through it, to express it well enough to get past the gate that is Stack Overflow often gets results.
Yeah, and that's another talk I give about those. And I do go into a little bit today, but that is what people value, those soft skills about around problem solving and really understanding what you're trying to do, and your teamwork and collaboration. All those things are the things that are never going to go away.
Yeah, and are essential. And you can clearly see the difference between a senior and junior person.
Definitely. Even if they're both using Copilot, if they're both provided with the same like context in terms of like the files that they're using, they'll get different results because of the way they're actually using
how they approach the problem.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You see that in their language and how they even ask questions about the question.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all part of it. Yeah, and I think we're going to break for just a moment for this very important message.
There's always something new from our sponsor, Text Control. They just released version 30 of their document processing library that includes new document collaboration features. Using TX Text Control, you can integrate online document editing, document signing, collaboration, and PDF processing into your ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core web applications. Whether you need to create PDF invoices, quotations, or reports, TX Text Control provides the developer libraries for all document-related tasks. Check out the new features and see their technologies in action by visiting the live demo at demos.textcontrol.com.
And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Hey, hey.
And our friend Michelle is here talking a little Copilot. And we've had the fun part, I think, of just getting through. Everybody's seen it. Sort of many people have played with it. I think $10 a month isn't the end of the world.
Yeah, well, and even still, if you are worried about that $10 a month to start with, there's a 2-month free trial.
Yeah, so take it out first.
You can go and try it for 60 days.
That's actually nothing compared to the time that you're going to
save. It only needs to give you one good chunk of code, and you should be pretty happy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's $100 a year. So if you pay for the entire year, you get a couple of months free anyway. And that is US dollars, though. And I do understand that in certain parts of the world and for some developers, it is a little bit on the pricier side.
Well, especially the Europeans right now with the exchange rate. Good Lord. Should I be silly?
The Aussies with the exchange rate.
Yeah, no kidding. The Aussie dollar, I was just there when it wasn't that.
Oh, it fluctuates all the time. It's crazy.
Is it going to work better for me over time? Is it learning me or am I learning it?
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
I think it's a machine learning platform. So, it's AI driven now, but it's still based on, the code that's being trained. The more people use it, the more it's being trained and used. But also on the flip side, the more you use it, the more you understand how to better give it context and things like that.
Think about how well you write a search engine request these days.
Exactly.
Right?
As opposed to when
specify site, this piece in quotes, these additionals.
Again, coming back to the AI art thing, you try, because you can give it a try. The more you use it, the more you understand the type of context you have to provide it with. Like, for example, I didn't know I could ask for an image in by 16 by 9. Sweet. I can ask for a high resolution. I can ask in this style. I can, so the more you use a tool such as Copilot, the more you're going to
pick up all those parameters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just wonder about Copilot from that perspective, reading my own code. I guess every time I check stuff in, like, I also worry about it just getting caught in self-referential stuff.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. So the first one is, for example, most of the code, now we mentioned this before, all the code is synthesized. It's specific for you. But again, it's still a relatively new system. Not everything's perfect. So sometimes in very, very small percentage of cases, you will get code that is similar to something that already exists online.
Right. So the plagiarism issue.
So you can make sure that is, you can filter out that as an option. So say, for example, if you are writing proprietary code and you want to make sure there's none of that, you can turn off show me suggestions that may be similar. And then it's constantly checking to make sure that the suggestions that Copilot is giving you is not similar to another piece of code. Which is most of the time it's not anyway, but again, it's not a perfect system yet. It's still relatively new. So that's the first one, is you can filter out those things. Second one is if you are now, obviously, Copilot only takes code from publicly available repositories.
Right.
So if you're working on something privately, it's not going to take that code. But some people still get a bit worried about, their public code being used to train the model or improve other GitHub products.
What's occurring to me is that if somebody accidentally puts a SQL database connection string in their public repo, right, which happens.
Yep.
And that gets, picked up by Copilot. Can I say, SQL connection string or something, and will Copilot spit that out? Do you have anything in there to filter out sensitive?
So that's what I was just about to get to. So yeah, obviously some people worry about even using their own public code,
right?
Either to train Copilot or to improve other GitHub products. You can turn that off. So you can say, I don't want GitHub to use my code, even my publicly available code, to improve its products.
But it is possible that could happen.
In terms of?
Yeah. So you've trained Copilot on a repo that is public that somebody accidentally left a connection string in.
So I'm not the one who went through and trained and filtered all this stuff.
Yeah.
So, but we did have people go through everything to ensure that sensitive information.
Well, have you ever tried to check in a connection string lately into GitHub? It freaks out.
Does it?
Oh yeah. It really does.
I haven't done that.
It gets very upset when it says, I think this might be secrets. I really don't want secrets in my repo.
There's a lot of in there to stop people committing their code to see or committing their secrets.
That's the answer I was.
This is a public repo. Like, if I have private repos, and they do have things like that in it.
And it's becoming more common now too, in that because people can have now unlimited public and private repos.
Yeah.
So it is becoming more of a, this should have been a private repo, but it's a public repo.
But every time you go to make that mistake, it just pops like, hey, that's public, right? Because I've been looking at this code and it looks like secrets. You probably don't want, oh no, I didn't want that there. That was supposed to go in the private repo.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. It's definitely gotten better at all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it does speak to this problem space of, what's it picking up? What's it learning from?
Right. And is there a possibility that I could end up with somebody else's secret in my...
Well, the more interesting aspect to me on this would be, sure, that was publicly available code, but it was under a GPL license.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, does the licensing matter? Because I know it's not directly copying the code, but you might be close. And if that's GPL and somebody wants to kick up a fuss about it, like, that's an interesting question.
She said publicly available, right? So if it's publicly available, that means it's not restricted by any license, right?
Well, any publicly available code has to have a license attached to it.
Well, I mean a GPL license, which is different from MIT.
If it has a license that requires attribution
Yes.
or compensation, is it included in the process? Or
Again, that's not my area of expertise.
I'd have
to defer back to one of my other teammates for that one.
I can't imagine it would. I mean,
well, and in the end, how much different does the code have to be? Like, just because you slapped a GPL license on a logger doesn't mean you can't contribute your own code.
Well, and you're not implementing an entire library either. You're taking a snippet of code from something.
Which generally where the license matters is you're going to use that library.
Right.
Which is an interesting aspect if you think about what Copilot's doing. Like, does it actually make sense to bring in the code and go, there's a tool for this?
Or a comment that says this code is covered under GPL. You can use it, but you have to
follow the licensing.
You have to follow the license, and here's a link.
Yeah. I mean, this is all really fascinating when you get into this, just because I love it helping me write against APIs I don't know well. Like, full stop, thanks for that.
And languages you don't know
and languages you don't know well, right? Like, both of those are killer. But there is an interesting question about find me a library for the things I need, right? It might be in a later version to say, hey, there's a library for this.
There is some talk about that. For example, if there's some suggestion that might be similar, to give you a link to where that came from.
Sure.
I'm not sure where that's at, so I can't really comment too much on that. But it's all these things, again, when we talk about all this, Copilot is still relatively new.
Sure, yeah.
And AI itself, in terms of AI coding suggestions and natural language processing to this type of degree, this is all new in every industry. So we're going to come up against all these challenges.
Yeah, bit by bit.
But what I think is key to know with GitHub is that, we are developers first. Mm-hmm. We care about being ethical about what we do. So every step where we're innovating with Copilot, we take the understanding that we are innovating this responsibly, and we're going to take every measure to make sure that what we're doing is right, is ethical, and, that the right, things have been considered. So anything that goes out, I don't think will be, too contentious.
Yeah.
When it comes to
it's also with the best intentions, right? Like some of that's going to come
right. Yeah.
Because you can imagine doing piece by piece. You're building something piece by piece. You get a Copilot's helping you along the way, and at some point, it's like you're basically recreating XYZ library. Like this has been a solid space.
Are we going to see a new esport competitive Copilot coding challenges?
That would be very interesting, actually, because I know competitive coding is a thing, and you get people live on stage, and it's all right. You've got this challenge. You're on the clock. Whoever can finish right and first, you win. And it's competitive coding is a thing. So competitive coding with Copilot. Maybe we should start something there. I think
that could be as
big as something in it there.
It could be as big as Top Chef. There you go.
Well, who can write a comment that spits out the most lines of code?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Number of metrics.
There you go.
And constraints.
We used to play a game in the old programming days where it's like, could you write a whole piece of software that was one line of code? It was this was back when you could chain statements together with colons and
batch
things.
file, echo,
I
hello.
think now it's more like, we want you to use more lines because it's easier to understand and it's much better. But again, all these things are changing. I think they're changing for the better.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk around anything to do with AI though. I started an AI company as my first startup, and everyone was always freaking out going, oh, you're building Skynet and it's going to be terrible, and all those kind of things. It's
There's a reason for that, right? I mean, the first time anybody heard the word artificial intelligence, it was 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Hal tried to kill everybody.
Exactly.
We set ourselves up to be angry with this thing.
If you look at it, movies are a really good way to, for understanding, what is possible, and then actually looking at some of those hard questions. I actually really like the morality in a lot of these movies, even things like, I Am Legend, where they're looking at, new vaccine.
Yeah, are you the good guy or the bad guy?
Yeah, exactly. And same thing with, I, Robot and WALL-E even. You look at these things and go, a lot of these things they're talking about, whilst when the movie came out, it was very much science fiction, this is all
getting closer.
Jarvis, like my housemate was sitting there.
You also have 2001: A Space Odyssey, all the flippin' Terminator movies.
But that's the thing, right? Yeah. So my housemate was there saying, "Oh, we're actually really close to getting Jarvis, aren't we?" I'm like, "Well, in the sense of having Jarvis as not the Ultron version, but the actual just AI help." I'm like, "We have that. That's already there." So a lot of it's to do with, a lot of these things that we can create are possible. Should we actually do them? And if we are going to build these things, what are the things we need to consider to ensure that what we're doing is ethical and moral and right? And I think
constructive to society, not destructive to society.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. Like things like, the Terminator and even like Blade Runner and stuff like that, you look at this and go, well, hang on, I'm very much into anime. There's one called Psycho Pass, and anime really dives into a lot of heavy issues that Western cartoons and movies don't really go into. And there's this Psycho Pass one where, a lot of it's to do with, should we be killing people off before they actually commit crime?
Right.
And it's all using AI to determine whether, and it's like, well, we probably have ways to predict that now.
Right.
Is that the right thing to do? Probably not. So I think, having all these science fiction fantasy movies are really good ways to ensure people actually think about it, because a lot of people, especially if they're not in the tech industry, will go, "Oh, but that's never going to happen. That's a long way off." And you're like, no, that's already here, and you need to start thinking about that.
And that was the theme of Minority Report too. It's like
I always talk about Minority Report is in my slides, actually.
Yeah, although they ended up, it's not technology per se, right? It was psychic abilities, right, and the tormenting of these poor souls. But certainly we see machine learning technology being used in the crime space to get to the point of saying you're likely to have crime there. We just know that bad data often leads to bad outcomes on those kinds of models.
We could go very deep here, right?
Yeah. And we have on other shows talking about the ethics around all of this data mining and machine learning side of things. We're just talking about programming, and this clearly just another tool in our kit to help us move faster and do more in less time. And
hopefully be happier while doing it.
Yeah. You know what's fun? Making stuff work.
Yeah, totally.
As opposed to thrashing over an API.
Yeah, I mean, at NDC Oslo, I've just been doing a workshop for the last 2 days, and one of the people in my workshop yesterday, the first time we did the action, it failed, and it was all like, those horrible red dots you get when you fail.
Yeah.
Next time we'd fixed it and it was like, it's all green. It's like, yay! And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I get really excited when stuff works, when I get green dots and little happy faces. So there is something to be said about, getting excited about making things work.
I had a conversation with someone yesterday talking about, as a product manager, it's like, your dev hasn't checked anything in 2 days. Do you really think later day is going to be the greatest check-in known to man? That seems unlikely. Like, more likely it's time to drop by and go, how you doing? And why do you have keyboard imprints on your forehead? What's that about? But, you get caught in that rabbit hole of an API implementer. It's that I want to do X, this expression, and now you're fighting with syntax to make that happen.
Yeah.
And that thrashing, days can go by.
One of the goals of Copilot, and this is me saying it, not GitHub saying it, but I think one of the goals of Copilot is to ensure less head bashing.
Yes.
Fewer keyboards broken, fewer mugs thrown against walls, fewer, computers absolutely smashed to pieces. Yes. So again, that is the GitHub line. Yeah, obviously we want developers to be happy. We're all about developer happiness and productivity. So, less broken computers is better for everyone.
I think the reverse capability you mentioned briefly earlier on, this idea that I could highlight a chunk of code and say, what does this do? That it'll now write the comment.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really good. And somebody commented with being like, well, why do you want Copilot to be able to explain to you code that you've already written? I was like, okay, there's two things to that.
Right.
The first one is you might not have written that code. You might be obviously cloning, forking a repo, grabbing it from Stack Overflow.
Absolutely.
So it might not necessarily be the code that you wrote. That's the first thing. That's why Copilot's helpful. Second thing is, yes, you might have written the code. You might have trouble, though, explaining. Well, we see a lot of developers have this trouble explaining how that code works to someone else. And that's why we see developer documentation in a lot of places. I'm not going to say everyone's like this because not everyone is, but a lot of developers aren't fantastic at documentation and putting in code comments. So when someone does come along to use their code, they're like, I have no idea what's going on here. And so having that explain there, so that if you have written your code and you're like, well, I know how this works and I can explain it to me, but how would I explain it to someone else? And I think having that Copilot there and being able to click the explain button multiple times to get different ways of explaining it, I think that's very, very powerful.
You realize that's an esport then.
Yeah, exactly.
you get Copilot generate a chunk of code, then you get it to explain it, then you take that explanation to generate another piece of code, see what you eventually end up with. Like how many iterations do you get before you just like, I don't know.
So when did it go public? Copilot.
Oh, very recently.
A few months ago.
Literally a couple of months ago. So we've had it out in technical preview since Universe last year, which was about November last year. So we've had literally thousands of developers using it in technical preview, giving us ideas and suggestions and feedback. And now it's GA. So anyone can go in and use the free trial now or pay for the license for Copilot. And very soon, I don't have the exact timeline, but very soon Copilot for Business is coming out.
What does Copilot for Business mean?
So Copilot for Business will mean that organizations will be able to buy Copilot for use for their employees, and therefore they'll be able to...
Site license, basically.
That too, but they'll be able to control. Remember before I was telling you about the filtering?
Oh, yeah.
So they'll be able to control the filtering from their level.
Company policy.
As in company policy. So, and there's a few other things. Again, I'm not on the enterprise side of GitHub, so I don't know what else Copilot for Business is promised to do, but it is coming soon, and it is probably, so I spoke to our support team who's looking after our Copilot tickets. That is one of the most requested support tickets at the moment is, when is Copilot for Business coming? Not is it coming, because everyone knows it's coming, when is it coming? I need this thing for my developers. So that's really exciting to see that there's so many people just keen to try out Copilot for their
Well, I know it's integrated with Studio. What other development platforms are big on Copilot? I don't think it's a .NET centric thing at all.
Yeah. So it's any like web editor or any editor, basically.
Most people, Code for sure.
Most people are using VS Code. But
NeoVim and JetBrains IDEs as well.
Good. There you go. And it's also then it works on GitHub.dev as well, which is the web editor version of VS Code.
Which is what it shows in all the samples is that editor. It's a great way to take advantage of it.
This is great. Lots of good stuff. I don't know what else to say except go get it.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be another version. It's just going to constantly improve.
I think so. I mean, again, it's a machine learning model. And if you've worked with any type of machine learning, you know that you don't just train the model and that's it. You know that the model is constantly learning and changing. So
you hope anyway.
Again, it's built on the OpenAI Codex. They're just about to release the GTP4 for the OpenAI Codex. So I think, once that is released, we'll start seeing more, refinement of Copilot. So
it'll be a question of if and when they implement GTP4, because it's actually a smaller, simpler implementation.
It definitely says that. I was looking up on their YouTube channel the other day. They did a live demo of GPT-4, so it is coming soon. I don't know. They haven't announced
the live
dates.
Demo of Copilot with GPT-4
of just GTP.
Yeah,
of OpenAI Codex.
I'm just really interested.
There's some alphabet soup here. We should untangle. GTP is the engine, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with code, right?
So the OpenAI Codex there is a code aspect of it, but the OpenAI Codex is designed more for inputting, just general language, so like plain language, and it generating code from that. Whereas Copilot's kind of the next stage. Yes, you can obviously use the comments and things like that, and you can actually use Copilot to write blog posts, haikus, I did a video on I use Copilot to explain what Copilot is using Copilot, which was
one of my guys at
we're back to esports again.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my guys at Affinext that Brian McKay, he wrote a program to have two historical figures have a conversation with each other.
I have actually seen that one. That's pretty cool. So the OpenAI Codex is more about natural language and plain text into code, whereas Copilot is kind of the next stage. Yes, it'll take natural language and plain text and, try and help you with the code, but it also then helps synthesize code from you already writing code. So I think that's where like that next level of power comes from.
This is awesome.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if GDP4 behaves the same as GDP3 because it does seem like there's structural differences.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the OpenAI Codex or the GPT-3, GPT-4.
Yeah.
I don't know that stuff super well, so don't take my word for it.
A whole other set of problems.
It's really interesting though. So I do encourage anyone who is interested in this stuff to look at the OpenAI Codex because it is not just the foundation of Copilot.
Yeah.
A lot of companies are using OpenAI
for all kinds of things.
For all kinds of things, and it's just so interesting to see. And how it's evolved over the years, I think is really
these
cool.
powerful language tools.
Yeah.
Like that's really what they are.
Yeah. One last thing I will say, I really like Copilot too because it can actually translate. So I mentioned before it can translate across languages, so Python into Go, Ruby. It actually can translate into spoken language as well.
Oh, wow.
Which I think is really cool. Yeah. We're like,
do you mean one language from like
English to Spanish?
English into Spanish,
French,
Portuguese. Like it's pretty powerful.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Just having that tool.
So I just leave you with that mind blown.
Mind blown.
I needed that last night when I ordered dinner.
For Norwegian.
Well, somebody said to me, and again, don't quote me on this because this is just what people are just throwing ideas out. And I was like, that would be really cool. Someone's like, so when is, so we've obviously got Google Translate. They're like, oh, when is GitHub Translate coming out? And I was like, oh,
yeah.
Who knows? Like,
it's a possibility, yeah.
Anything's possible at this point in time. I think it comes back to the idea of most things these days are possible. Should they actually be done?
Are they beneficial?
Michelle Mannering, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please come
Enjoy
back
the rest
again.
of NDC Oslo.
Yeah,
definitely. All right, and we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter bands by the FCC. Yes, I'm a